Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Happy New Year, and what better way to begin 2025 with some beginnings? The top 10 beginnings to Agatha Christie novels. And this was so tough to pick. I didn't think it would be this difficult, and I didn't think I'd have this many options to choose from as I did. I did wind up picking mostly the ones I suspected I would pick before I sat down and really thought about it in depth. And when I say beginnings, I'm sort of a little inconsistent here. We'll get into that soon enough. There are no major spoilers in this video, but I may allude to certain events, but I'm not going to say like who the murderer is or reveal any tricks or anything like that. And before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. And I have quite a few honorable mentions. This is even the whole list of honorable mentions. The Man in the Brown Suit has a fun beginning with Anne Bedingfeld's backstory. Lord Edward Dies has a pretty important and almost iconic beginning. The reason why I didn't put it on the list is because I don't know how to talk about it without spoiling the plot. And also, again, I don't think like these other ones are like it's not that much better anyway. I always like Death on the Nile's beginning with the two men talking about Lynette Doyle and Lynette Ridgway, actually, and those two same men talking about her at the end. But the beginning does go on for like way too long. I was surprised I didn't put Appointment with Death on the list. You do see she's got to be killed. It's such a great opening line, but I don't think the opening itself is top tier beyond that line. Murder is Easy has a great opening, but didn't make the cut. 1-2 Buckle My Shoe has Poirot in the dentist chair, which is great. Evil Under the Sun has like an iconic line to me about how the sun tanning bodies look like bodies in a morgue. Towards Zero, I was surprised didn't make it, but again, the beginning section there is really long to the point where I don't think you can say it's like entirely the beginning of the novel. It does also get into a bit of a plot there. Same thing with A Murder is Announced. I mean, the opening passages are just too long, and like when you go on for that long, you're no longer in the beginning of the book. You're sort of more getting into the thick of the plot. After the Funeral has a very good start, but I didn't put that on the list. I was stunned I didn't put By the Pricking of My Thumbs on the list, but when I double checked the book, the Mrs. Lancaster Tuppence scenes are not the beginning, actually. There's actually a chapter before that, which is still fun with like Aunt Ada being horrible to Tuppence, but again, it's not as good. And the final honorable mention here is Curtain. I mean, purely for the nostalgia of seeing Hastings and Poirot reunited. But again, it's not really that great beyond that. All right, let's get into it. Starting at number 10, I have an opening from a book that I actually didn't remember how it began. This was actually the only Christie novel I didn't remember how it began, and I had to look it up, and I'm glad I did. And that book is Mrs. McGinty's Dead. And this begins with a delightful segment of Poirot going out to dinner and admiring the food in the typical Poirot way. He wishes he could eat more than 3 times a day and like the proper ways to eat meals. And then he reminisces about Hastings, who was out in Argentina, and how he fondly misses his faithful sidekick and also calls him a stooge, which is just so Poirot, really getting his digs in there at Hastings. Now, this opening isn't necessarily relevant plot wise and all, but it's just so extremely delightful. It's just Poirot being Poirot in that lovable way we all come to know. And we can extend this beginning a little bit into Poirot's encounter with Superintendent Spence, which leads to more of this type of content with Poirot bringing Spence over to his flat to enjoy cordials, and he just talks about like all his his blueberry cassis or whatever cassis I believe it's pronounced. It's so quintessentially Poirot, and yeah, this isn't like the most plot oriented opening or the most action packed, but it's just so delightful and, dare I say, cozy. That's probably the only time you're ever going to hear me say the word cozy in a positive way on this channel, but I found the beginning just really fun, really delightful. So I have Mrs. McGinty's Dead here at number 10. At number 9, the beginning of a novel that never makes these top 10 lists for anything, but the opening is pretty good, and that is Hickory Dickory Dock. And this opening prominently features Miss Lemon, who really doesn't make that many novel appearances, certainly not as many as I think people assume she does. But the normally efficient Miss Lemon here has made three mistakes in the same letter, which is just so shocking to Poirot, he can't believe it. And then we're privy here to a lot of Poirot's inner thoughts about Miss Lemon, which include this like hilarious bit about how shocked he is that he finds out that Miss Lemon has a sister because he never thought of Miss Lemon as anything but efficiency personified, almost like a robot. It never occurred to Poirot that Miss Lemon existed outside the sphere of Poirot's work. And Miss Lemon, of course, makes these mistakes because she's worried about her sister and the thefts that are happening at the Hickory Road hostel. But this opening is a little bit more plot relevant than the one in Mrs. McGinty's Dead, but also has Poirot and Miss Lemon in it. It's just as delightful for me as Mrs. McGinty's Dead, but because this one has Miss Lemon in it, I decided why not just put this above the other here at number 9. At number 8 is the first Miss Marple on this list, and that is the beginning of A Caribbean Mystery. And I've always found the opening of this novel just to be very funny. It's full of Miss Marple's internal thoughts, they're just like hilarious to me. I mean, first off, she hates being in the Caribbean and would rather be back in St. Mary Mead. And she goes on this like internal harangue about how awful her nephew Raymond West's books are and how he gets sex all wrong. And I know people find this like shocking, but I love this beginning because it shows the true nature of Miss Marple. I mean, Miss Marple is not this nice, like, shielded old grandmother. Like, a lot of people talk about her in that way, but in reality, she's not. Like, she's a shrewd old woman who knows everything and shies away from nothing. And yeah, Miss Marple has opinions on sex. And by the way, she thinks her generation did it better than the current one, and she has more bitter slings at Raymond West and how awful he is. And we get this conversation between Raymond and his wife about whether or not Miss Marple knows what queer people are, which I always find really funny. And then in all of this, we have the major Palgrave stuff going on with Miss Marple just completely bored out of her mind, and she thinks she's like him, a stuffed frog, which is such a good physical description. I think this opening is just like the best of Miss Marple, although there are actually three Miss Marple beginnings higher than this one, with Caribbean Mystery finishing here at number 8. At number 7, sticking with Miss Marple, is a much more like subdued opening, and that comes from Nemesis. And in my opinion, there's actually like a better, more profound version of this opening a little later on this list, but I love this opening as well. It's just Miss Marple's morning routine, and she's very old here, and she's just doing her everyday things with a little bit more difficulty. She's starting to get a little cantankerous. I love the passages of her reading the newspapers, which she begins by absolutely shredding their quality and complaining about the formatting and how the newspaper just isn't good anymore. Imagine what she would think about newspapers in 2025. So she only looks at what she wants, which is the weddings, the births, but mostly the death announcements. And one of the names mentioned in the death announcements is Race, which I always assumed was Colonel Race. I mean, we don't know that, but again, that's a nice little Easter egg there. It's also a sad one, is now Colonel Race is dead. And I just found this whole passage to be so informative into the mind of Miss Marple. But, it's also sad that this is her life now. Her big excitement of the day is reading about who died. It's just very sad, but it's also just so extremely well written. So I put Nemesis here at number 7. And at number 6, back to Poirot with another title that rarely, if ever, gets much praise from me. But I like the opening, and that's the opening of Third Girl. Another one of these like openings that really shows the passage of time. I love this opening when Norma Restrick goes up to see Poirot, claims to have committed a murder she doesn't know anything about, and then just runs out of the room when she sees how old he is. There are just so many good factors at play here. I mean, first, the mystery is set up so well. It's extremely intriguing. Like, how does this girl not know if she committed a murder or not? Like, what does that mean? How does that happen? And it also shows the passage of time. And, the once celebrated Poirot, known the world over, is entirely forgotten in his old age. The young people don't know who he is, and like the opening of Nemesis, it's very sad in a way. And also, like Nemesis and Miss Marple's complaining, it's also a little funny. Like Norma screaming and running out of the room, and Poirot and George just like totally baffled by what's going on. And it gets better when Mrs. Oliver calls and Poirot tells her what happened, and Miss Oliver just completely forgets that she sent Norma to Poirot in the first place. It's all delightful, and there's a lot going on here, and it sets up the mystery wonderfully. Christie really sucks you in here. The rest of the novel, not so much, but I'm only assessing the openings in this video, so Third Girl comes in at number 6. At number 5, another Miss Marple, and this is the one I was referring to earlier when I talked about Nemesis, and that is the beginning of The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. And this is a better version of that one, really showing Miss Marple's age here. I mean, for one, she's basically a prisoner in her own house because the dreaded Miss Knight is taking care of her, and Miss Marple, hates Miss Knight. Miss Marple is basically babied and stuck with her because of Raymond West. Who else? Miss Marple is just so miserable and hates when Miss Knight says things like "we" when she means, just Miss Marple. Miss Marple has this great plan where she sends Miss Knight out to the stores to buy things like she knows Miss Knight will not be able to find there, just so she can escape for a little bit. It's all a lot of fun, and you really feel for Miss Marple here. And you get excited, like, oh yeah, she finally got one over, she's gonna be free for at least a little bit. And this is also where we learn about all the changes at St. Mary Mead and the development. And then finally, Miss Marple falls and injures herself. This isn't necessarily the happy moment you thought it was going to be. Christie never liked to be compared to Miss Marple, but Miss Marple espouses a lot of views on aging that Christie did. Christie did not like aging. Like, she did not like talking about her age. She was very defiant about her age. She never said that infamous quote about how archaeologists make the best husbands because the older the wife gets, the more interested he becomes. She never said that. She hated aging. It was a very sensitive subject for her. But with Miss Marple is concerned, Miss Marple does age, and Miss Marple does share Christie's views on aging and just how miserable it is. And these opening passages are really, again, sad for Miss Marple, but it's just so extremely well executed that I have it here at number 5. At number 4, I have the highest Poirot novel on the list, and it's another one I'm not the biggest fan of, but it's one my opinion always goes up over time, and has a great opening, and that is The Hollow. And I've talked about this before of how much I love these Christie openings where she briefly visits, most of the major characters, and we see these little brief, like, vignettes of just like what they're doing. Often it's not plot relevant, but character relevant, and we see these moments play a factor later on. Not the exact events, but you see the personality traits on display, so later events make a lot of sense. There's a lot of foreshadowing going on. And the segments that really stand out to me in The Hollow are, the one with Dr. Christo and his complaining about his patients and how he makes all this money off of them because they're delusional and they're gullible and they can't stand being told there's nothing wrong with them. We see Dr. Christo as both a jerk and a sympathetic figure. He's not particularly kind in thoughts to his patients or to his wife Gerda, but he also feels worn down and bored. And then we have Gerda, who is making lunch, and she's just so indecisive. Like, she has no idea what to do with the food she's serving. Should she put it away? Should she leave it out? Because John will get mad if it's cold, but he'll get mad if it goes bad. And then, like, as she's dithering around, the food just goes bad in her arms. I think the fat congeals. It really shows Gerda's scatterbrained and unintelligent personality, and how much she's like overthinking things, and she thinks she's so smart because she thinks a lot, but in reality she's just dumb. And then we have Lady Angatel, who is just so energetic and dynamic and fretting about everything and worrying about her house party, to the point where she burns out the bottoms of her teapot. And then we find out the butler Gudgeon has like a dozen identical teapots, so she doesn't notice she's ruined them. There's so much intricate character work in these opening passages of The Hollow. It's just so good and so delicious. And this is my best ranked Poirot opening here at number 4. At number 3 is sort of a similar style where we are privy to everyone's inner thoughts, and that is the opening of And Then There Were None, the only true standalone on this list. And this book begins with us receiving the inner thoughts of 8 of the 10 guests to the island as they travel to Soldier Island. And even if you never read this book, you sort of know the premise. So even on a first read, I mean, you know these people are unwittingly traveling to their deaths. And there's just so much foreshadowing going on as we learn these people's thoughts and read their letters. I know there's even a clue in the letters that's really good. I won't say what it is. And just a few of the moments that stand out to me are, Vera looking out at the sea and that reminding her of something. We have a Lombard not really concerned about anything, revealing his incautious nature. My favorite moment is probably the one with Blore, where he's on the train and this like incredibly old man is sitting next to him, and he just rants about the end of time and how the end is near. And Blore thinks this man must be crazy. Like this man is gonna die before he is. And you know what? We know that's not true. Unless that old man died like the next day, Blore will die first. And I always like the passage where Anthony Marston just like nearly runs Dr. Armstrong off the road, giving a lot of insight into both of their characters and just like a split second of a scene, Marston being this like total menace to society and Dr. Armstrong just so easily ticked off and impatient. Miss Brent has a great introduction about how much she hates gramophones, and she was promised no gramophones on Soldier Island, and she'll be one of the ones most haunted by what the gramophone says. Christie packs in so much into this opening sequence, you don't even fully realize it. I've read this book dozens of times, and each time I just see something new and a new insight into these characters, a new moment of foreshadowing something that happens later on. The thought of seeing all these people travel to their deaths is so ominous, despite none of the tone actually being written in the story. There's nothing like ominous going on. It just has this like feeling to it. Christie isn't writing in like, oh, it's dark and dreary or whatever. It's a summer day. There's no rain, although the storm is coming. It's just so ominous, despite the actual descriptions we get. Truly brilliant, and it finishes at number 3. And at number 2, and these top 2 are definitely the most fun openings in my opinion. I think And Then There Were None probably has the best opening from like a written standpoint and a plot standpoint, but these top 2 are just so much fun while also being very well executed. And at number 2, I have the only Tommy and Tuppence on the list, and that is NRM. And Tommy and Tuppence have very good openings. 75% of their novels have really good openings, but this is the only one I put on the list. NRM begins like a typical Beresford novel where Tommy is approached with doing spy work during World War II. What really makes this opening great, though, is Tuppence. She was not invited into the conversation, as she's now a middle aged woman. No one wants her to work for them, especially not in the war. She pretends to visit a sick neighbor, but she actually just ran and hid in a cabinet, which is believe is something we do see in one of the short story collections from them, the Partners in Crime. I believe she does the same thing there, and she listens in on Tommy's conversation. And what's truly wonderful is that Tuppence actually arrives at the destination before Tommy does. She shows up at the Sans Sushi Inn before Tommy does, showing once again Tuppence's ingenuity here. So it's a really great moment when Tommy walks in as Mr. Meadows and he sees Tuppence slash Mrs. Blankensop. I've always loved the light back and forth Tommy and Tuppence have in their relationship, and I think that is best exemplified in this opening passage. It also talks a lot about gender and age dynamics, exposing them as well. Tuppence is an older woman and she's sidelined because of her age and because of her gender, while Tommy was only sidelined because of his age, and that doesn't seem to matter anymore when the government needs him. I've always loved this beginning. It's so much fun, but it's only the second best Christie opening, in my opinion, so it comes in at number 2. And at number 1 is the opening that I frequently see called the best opening in any Christie novel. It is near universally described as such. And coming into this list, I didn't think I would have it at number 1, but it is. And that opening is from The Body in the Library. And this book begins absolutely nothing plot relevant, but with absolutely magnificent dream sequence featuring Dolly Bantry dreaming she won the local gardening contest. Her sweet peas won the prize, and the vicar is there presenting her with an award. It's so farcical and ridiculous, but in a good way. And although this sequence is not plot relevant, it does set that sort of satirical, light mood of the novel. The vicar's wife. We don't get a name for the vicar and his wife here, but I assume it's Leonard and Griselda Clement. And she's walking around in a bathing dress and no one notices. And this wonderful dream sequence is interrupted by the Bantry maid Mary just running in, screaming there's a body in the library, and then screaming some more, and then running out of the bedroom. The Bantrys just lay there discussing, like, are they dreaming this or what? Like, did Mary really come in and say there was a body in the library? And the phrase of his body in the library is repeated like so many times in this opening chapter. Colonel Bantry thinks his wife is still dreaming and obsessed with this mystery novel she was reading called The Mystery of the Broken Match, which I would like to think is an Ariadne Oliver novel. It sounds like a book she would write. I actually think this is a reference to an Ellery Queen novel called Halfway House. But nevertheless, The Mystery of the Broken Match is just also like one of those like typical spoof mystery tiles. Like, it sounds so cliche, just like The Body in the Library does. And Colonel Bantry gets out of bed, and the butler tells him he's called the police. And Bantry's like, "What for?" And the butler's like, "Well, there's a body in the library." It was like, must have been like the buzzword or something. Like, don't watch like the adaptation and play a drinking game because you'll be drunk before the first hour is over. But this is just all so much fun. It's an absolute delight. It's the best opening of any Christie novel. So, The Body in the Library had to come in here at number 1. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think are Christie's best openings and which ones you disagree with on my list. Next week, I was supposed to review Death in the Clouds, but I didn't do the reading, so that's been delayed a couple of weeks. So I swapped it out for a video that got some attention when I mentioned it, and that is a discussion on which Miss Marple novels, if any, are possible to pull off in 2025. Has the passage of time rendered these mystery plots impossible? What needs to change in order for them to work? Can they be saved? Or are Miss Marple novels only possible in the time they were written in? We will see. Until next time, Mystery Files.